Good morning again, everybody.
Good morning.
Reverend Josh is a very peaceful person until he's working with technology. He's like, dynamic. So we'll do our best. So we've got a little technology for you now and a little bit later in the service. It's great to see everyone this morning. Oh, there I am. That's part of what I wanted you to see. That's me in younger years right there. You remember Mom? Mom remembers, yeah. But look at that kid. Look how innocent he looks. And as I look a little closer, I can become conscious of just how unaware he is of all that's come before him, of how unconscious he is to an extent of all that is around him, and certainly how oblivious he is to all that is to come. Fast forward a couple decades. A slightly more recent picture of me.
It's a light beard, though.
It is. Some wisdom has been gathered, yeah. But as I look at him, I look at how innocent he looks. And as I look closer, I can see how unaware he is of all that has come before him, and how unconscious he is of just all that is around him, and how oblivious he most certainly is to all that is to come. So thank you for that. That's the only two pictures. My question would be, and I know that some of you here are a couple of years older than I am, I don't think that changes. Do you? That obliviousness? It's really interesting in life that the more wisdom or even experience we tend to gather only generally leads us to the conclusion of how much more there is to know, or how much it is that we don't know. But there is something that I find that kid and that chicken there having the beer drinking chicken have in common. And that's something today that I'm calling the starting point. That both that young man and the man that you saw in the second picture there were both surrounded by the same creative blueprint, the same creative spirit, the same possibility, the same type of consciousness. And that what I've learned in life is that we don't necessarily grow so much vertically or horizontally. I hope some of us, we grow horizontally, we don't mean to. Or even chronologically, but our growth is really something that takes place inwardly, right? It's something that we deepen over time. And the more that we deepen means to me is the more that we've embraced the possibility of the Spirit in our lives. It's the more that we understand that the starting point isn't where we began in a chronological sense, but it's something that's always with us. It's the question of, what will I live from? What will I live life from? My understanding of yesterday, my fear or sense of mystery about the unknown tomorrow, or with that presence and desire to live that all mystical and spiritual traditions have taught is right there with us all the time, to begin again, indeed, moment by moment. Roger Teal, in this Life of Joy, which we're studying to a degree this month, speaks to this idea of the starting point as this instant. And this instant, he tells us, and he means this literally, this instant is love, he tells us. To move into the power of love, know that it is the most elemental aspect of reality of which you can be aware. This holy instant, this very moment. Divine love includes all we can see, touch, or comprehend, yet it is even more. It includes the earth and indeed the entire cosmos, yet it is even more. It is the reality and beingness of this very instant. With this awareness, you will gain the keys to the kingdom of unconditional spiritual love. This transforms everything into progressively higher states. And the question for each of us is, do we believe in that love? Is it nice poetry that we resonate with and can imagine, or do we truly believe that we are surrounded by a creative power that is the source of all the cosmos and all the infinite that it is, and it's right here within us too? And that by cultivating a greater consciousness and sense of unity with it, we can use it in our lives in constructive ways. I'm going to be focusing on the innocence and the wisdom of kids today in the talk. And when I think of wisdom, I often think being a minister of Jesus. And one of the interesting things that people wonder about Jesus is that there's not a lot of stories about Jesus when he was a kid out there, right? You can study around here or there, but one of the only ones I know in the Christian scriptures is in the Gospel of Luke, and it's of Jesus when he's almost a teenager, when he's a preteen. He's 12 years old. And the family, the Christ family, takes a vacation to Jerusalem. They're not really the Christ, but that would be cool if they were. They go to Jerusalem on vacation, and they spend some time there, and they're on their way home on the camels or whatever it is that the family rides on, and they look around and they say, "Where's Jesus?" You know how you remember that movie? Yeah, Home Alone, the prequel. Right? Jesus isn't with them. And so they're not very happy. They've already made a full day's journey away from Jerusalem, and now they have to make a whole day's journey back. And where do they find Jesus? He's in the synagogue, and he's there studying the Torah and hanging out with the rabbis, and they're so impressed at how clear and articulate Jesus is that his parents are a little ticked off. "Jesus, how could you do this to us? Didn't you know," Jesus tells them, "that I would go to my Father's house?" is his answer. Now, this isn't a historical story. It's a metaphorical story. One way of taking the metaphor and message of this is that Jesus is the Son of God, and he was going to his Father's home. A deeper, to me, interpretation of the story is that Jesus, in his young age, was learning about the Father's house, learning about the Father's temple. But as his ministry grew on, as he grew up, he began to realize that your Father's house isn't necessarily in the synagogue or in the temple, that it's a consciousness. That your Father's house is something that you reside in whenever you are conscious of your true son or daughtership with the Spirit. That when you know your unity with your divine source, you carry it with you wherever you are. So you always abide in the Father's house when you are aware that that starting point, its divinity, is something that surrounds you and is with you at all times. Sometimes we're all out of choices in the sense that we no longer want to choose from our past because it seems that no choice that we've chosen in the past is serving us any longer. We no longer want to choose from a sense of fear or a not knowing about the future. We must depend on the spontaneity of what this moment offers us. We have to depend upon the possibilities of the here and the now. We have to learn to believe in a reality of spirit. Teal says, "The material world we perceive with our senses seems so real, so unquestionable. Yet who can deny the limits of the senses to give us a complete report? We know there are sounds we can't hear with our ears, bandwidths of light we can't see with our eyes. Thankfully, we also can't see all the microorganisms that crawl all over us." Our physical senses are wonderful instruments, but they don't even do a complete job of telling us about this physical realm, much less helping us to perceive the invisible realms. There is so much more to life than our senses alone can reveal. If we can accept this, then it's easier to open to an inner reality system that produces this outer world we but partially perceive. Till goes on to quote Richard Bach, who said, "By your choice dwell you now in the world which you have created. What you hold in your heart shall be true, and what you most admire, that you shall become. You are life inventing form. And every mystic who ever lived, every spiritual teaching at its heart is based upon the fundamental premise that we are surrounded by something that we cannot see with our senses, but that we can know and cultivate in our own spirit. We are surrounded by a creative infinite, by a creative power. And we are indeed its very demonstration. And if we can learn, if we can study, if we can practice, we can become aware of God's love in us and practice it for greater means, for greater success, for greater harmony in our relationships. All it is required is an ability to start with our understanding in this here and now. Not that there's anything wrong with the past, but we can only rely on what it teaches us so much. We have to be willing to recognize there's more than what we think we know. And the unknown, walking through the unknown, is nothing wrong with that either, but we're always walking in the dark. And if we don't start at all, if we always hold back, then we'll always feel stuck. All of life, all creativity requires a step into the brand new. This isn't just in the spiritual creative sense, this is in the everyday sense of living our everyday lives, learning to hold ourselves not to the past but to the present. Learning to think not from the past but from the present. I had a really great experience a couple weeks ago in our youth church. We were having a wonderful interfaith service here, and I got to go hang out with the youngest kids in the youth room, and they were being taught by Sylvia and Lisa that day, and they were studying, like we are this month, affirmations. And so April had cut out these different emotions and qualities and things, and we're putting them on the board. So there was happiness, anger, sadness, love. And there were 2 boxes. And what they were doing were building affirmations together. And so when the teacher grabbed one of the words, if it could be used to build an affirmation, all the kids would agree, and it would go in the box that said yes. If the word couldn't be used to build a good positive affirmation, they would put it in the box that said no. So it sounds pretty simple. And especially when they drew love or happiness, all the kids were very quick to say yes. I am love. I am happiness. That was easy. And then one of the teachers drew the word anger. And I wanted to be a good little student, so I wanted to shout, no! Anger's bad. Put it in the no pile. Right into the no box. But the kids were much smarter than me in that moment. Because they kind of thought about it. And they wondered about it. Well, one of the kids asked, well, what if I'm seeing someone get bullied at school and it makes me angry? Wouldn't that be a good thing? Sadness was drawn from the board, and you could see the thoughtfulness again. Well, I don't like being sad, but sad is really important as well. So one of the kids suggested that there be a maybe pile. But it was pretty profound for me to watch your kids in there thinking from the present moment, not looking for the right answer, not looking to our adult and how we tend to deal with our emotions, which usually isn't all that wonderful, but understanding and coming to me, the exactly right conclusion that no emotion is bad, that there's no such thing as a bad emotion, that what's bad is when we don't listen to our emotions, or what's bad is when we repress our emotions to a degree that we start expressing them in an unhealthy way. What a profound understanding for these kids to reiterate or teach to the teachers in there that day. So there's something about living from a starting point where we see with present eyes, where we live with an open present heart, where we can begin to perhaps break some of the seemingly unending patterns of yesterday to live and create a more creative tomorrow. When we refer to God in our philosophy, we like to refer to God in the present tense. We like to refer to spirit in the present tense. We like to emphasize God not so much as a noun, although we believe in God as the noun, but particularly as the verb, not as the acted, but as the acting. That spirit is not as much created as it is creative. that spirit is not so much happened as happening. It's this idea that, to me, one of my favorite metaphors for God is to say, God is brand new. That yes, we believe and recognize the eternality of spirit, that it's something that's always has been and always will be, but a central characteristic is that it is always brand new life, that creative life that we get in touch with through our spiritual practice, through contemplation, through play, through connecting with those that we love. We cultivate a sense of this life, this brand new life, and we can apply it for greater purposes. One of the messages of looking at our past, seeing who we used to be and seeing who we are today, is recognizing that this brand new power, these infinite possibilities, have always been there. It's always been right here. Teal tells a heartwarming story about losing his mother and going through her house, cleaning up things, and coming across his baby booties. So how many people here have their first baby shoes, their baby booties? He describes them. He says, light blue, lace-up leather booties. I took them home, then inspected them more closely a few days later. The journey, the changes in my life cascaded over me. The soul I am incarnated into, the fetus in my mother's womb. Another change brought me into my parents' arms, but then came a defining moment. I was placed in these very booties to learn to walk, the physical mechanism to support a spiritual passage, the initiation of my journey of becoming. These booties would kickstart my personal evolution. I would learn to walk, then run, and my journey would then wend through constant changes. And he goes on, I realized that no one, not even myself, could foresee what my life would become, how it would unfold. Yet the potential was there all along, waiting to be activated. Every soul possesses that same magnificent and amazing potential that was activated when we were placed in our baby booties. It hasn't run out, but we have to cooperate and say yes, especially to changes. This is what the journey is all about. It still continues and calls us each into greater and greater glory. Quoting Jesus, he says, except you become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So I love this idea of not only an infinite potential that's always been with us through life, but that it's always there for us to begin again. That our potential could never be diminished, but it can be unactualized. It's up to us to tune into it, to be willing to recognize that starting over, that starting again, is never about moving backwards. It's always about moving forward. Starting over is never about moving backwards. It's always about moving forward. Using the starting point isn't always easy because sometimes it means letting go of the past. Sometimes the starting point is our last option when we feel victimized by the end of a difficult or challenging circumstance in our lives. It would be easy to give into that circumstance, to end as the victim. But what the starting point offers us is that ability and courage to begin again. Teal tells a brief story about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who is so well known for her work with the dying, that she experienced a great loss when her house burnt down unexpectedly. And she wrote a letter after this, speaking to this idea of beginning again. She says, at moments like this, we stand at a fork in the road. If we take the fork most commonly traveled, we collapse, we give up, feeling hopeless and defeated. It takes, after all, very little effort to feel victimized. We can, however, take the other fork. We can view the unhappy experience as an opportunity for a new beginning. We can keep our perspective, look for growth opportunities, and find an inner reservoir of strength. By simply deciding to see the possibilities rather than the pain, I was able to come through the loss of my home with more strength and contentment than I had ever before the fire. No longer tied to my house, I decided to move to Arizona to be closer to my son. I loved my new surroundings as much as I did my previous environment. Looking back, I see that I was too attached to my old environment to make the move on my own. In a sense, I needed the tragedy to push me onward. So So in no way in reading this do I want to affirm that we need tragedies to move us onward. But the idea, again, is that no matter what may be taking place in our lives, that starting point, that opportunity to begin again, is the greatest promise of all the spiritual masters, of every great spiritual teacher who ever was, never pointed to anything outside of yourself to access and live from what has been given birth inside of you, as you. So how do we cultivate the starting point so that it's clear in our lives? We do so by being willing to see possibilities again, by willing to take on the mind of a child again, to be willing to see that things don't always have to be the way that we think they have been, but to open up to something brand new in our relationships, in our work, in our health, in however our way of operating may be. I love a story that my good dear friend Dorothy Lance likes to tell, and she's here today, and I hope she doesn't mind me pointing out that she's a beautiful woman, older and growing in her 90s. And she shared, at least with me a couple different times, just a beautiful story about her childhood and growing up through the Great Depression, and the family had a farm, and she would go up, and this is at least how I imagine it, up to the haystack, up at the very top with that little window that outlooks. And she would share that she just lay down in that hay and looked up at the sky. And Dorothy loved the Bible as a child, and she loved hearing all those Bible stories. And so she would look up at the sky and she would imagine going to all those places, going to Egypt, going to Israel, traveling around. This is also at a time where she maybe didn't know if she was going to have dinner that night. Who knows? Well, as Dorothy's life progressed, she got to go to all those places. She got to achieve all of the possibilities that she imagined there in that farm, and even more. And just talking with her this week, we both had tears in our eyes, and she was sharing that she knows that it was dreaming of those possibilities, that was thinking about those possibilities, that somehow that thinking, that moment, was influential, was instrumental in all that traveling taking place and achieving that. So I think the question that leaves for us is, what possibilities are we still dreaming of? What possibilities are you giving yourself the time and the energy to consider, to imagine? What potential are you not only open to, but willing in your heart to say yes to? If we could only have the wisdom of that little child up in the barn, willing to look out at the sky and recognize that it's not defined, but a blank canvas that begins to operate as we begin to imagine, as we begin to cultivate and articulate the potentialities in our own heart, we can begin to manifest those in beautiful ways. So just closing with a prayerful moment, I invite you to join me if you choose. Just opening our hearts and our minds to those possibilities in life. Recognizing we cannot achieve them in our past, nor can we really achieve them in our future. The starting point towards the greatest possibilities in life begins right here and right now. They can only be accepted and experienced right here and right now. So making a renewed commitment to live, not from limited understandings, but from a sense of renewed purpose. Living from that spirit that is the creative fact, all things. And we let it guide our thoughts, guide our actions, inform us of wisdom we are seeking. And with a listening spirit, with a receptive spirit, say yes to its wisdom, say yes to its grace, say yes to its abundance of life. We let it be in gratitude, and so it is. Thanks for your time, everybody, this morning.